There's always one thing that matters most, more than what we love, what we value, who we support, what we believe, or what ideology we subscribe to. And that one thing, of course, is the truth. We need the facts. We need to deal in reality. And let me take you through a bit of a revelation, a bit of a turnaround from the ideologues in the media as they decide eventually to give the truth a bit of a run when it comes to the pandemic. This relates to one of the most important realities in the world at this moment. That is, where did the coronavirus come from? How did this global crisis arise? And therefore, what can we learn to help us now and in the future? Well, as you know, we have aired facts and informed opinions about the origins of the virus on this program over the past year. And much of the evidence has pointed to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a top-ranking viral research facility very close to the Wuhan wet markets that were at the centre of so much early speculation. Some of the most important reporting about the Wuhan Institute of Virology came from Sky's own Sharri Markson in a world-exclusive report for the Daily Telegraph in May last year that made waves around the world. Sharri's reports did not claim to prove the origins of the virus, but rather floated facts about the virus laboratory and confirmation that authorities in the US and elsewhere believed there could be a link. In other words, we needed to know the truth, and investigating the role of the Wuhan Virology Institute was crucial in that process. Incredibly, for her troubles, for pursuing the truth and sharing what she could with the public, Sharri was attacked and mocked by the ABC's Paul Barry and his Media Watch program.
This exclusive report from the Daily Telegraph's Sharri Markson, which was seized on by TV and radio news, gave us a pretty good steer on who is to blame.
Batman! Exclusive!
Chinese scientists linked to virus probe worked in Australia.
Inside the paper, headed Aussie links to Bat Lab duo, was a double-page spread with pictures of the high-security Wuhan lab and the scientists who've been studying bat viruses there, similar to the one causing COVID-19. And while it wasn't stated, the implication was clear, not least to some TV reporters following it up, that these scientists may have screwed the world by letting the virus get out.
Of course, when COVID-19 first broke out, it was believed that it originated from the Wuhan wet markets, but it's now been revealed, that it could have actually accidentally been released from the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
So how likely is it that the virus escaped from that Chinese lab? Well, in short, it's not.
So not only was the ABC dismissive, Barry was smug and sure of himself, and at the same time he dissed Markson's reporting and other journalists taking it seriously. He was happy enough to trust the instincts of the Green Left media.
Why did the lab escape theory still dominate the story, especially when virus experts had dismissed it 3 days earlier in the Sydney Morning Herald?
COVID-19 did not come from lab.
The evidence is overwhelming that the virus that causes COVID-19 jumped from animals to humans, rather than escaping from a laboratory, virus experts say.
Sharri must have missed that bulletin.
So remember, at this time, no one knew how the virus had arisen, how it had crossed to humans. Some of the world's top medical experts and intelligence agencies were trying hard to find out. But apparently all they had to do was ask Paul Barry, because he claimed to know that it did not come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This, of course, was the line that was coming from Beijing, where they were even trying to blame the US for sending the virus into China with frozen food. So why would Barry be so keen to dismiss these revelations from Sharri Markson, dismiss these investigations? Why was he so sure the virus could not have come from the Wuhan lab? Well, I think we know why. Yes, good old Trump derangement syndrome.
We also think Markson should have told readers that almost every virus expert had dismissed the lab escape theory. And we believe this get out in the middle of the story, that the telly's not suggesting the two scientists were responsible for the outbreak, is insufficient. Meanwhile, does anyone still believe? Well, yes, they do. President Trump, for one.
Have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
And what is the evidence? He refused to say. as did the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who in a confused and contradictory interview repeated the claim to ABC America.
I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Clearly, the lab escape story is one the Trump administration wants to be true.
Yeah, I think it's as puerile and as dangerous as that, because Trump might want it to be true, it must be false. So the ABC dismissed the story, misled its audiences, and once more failed to live up to its obligations to be fair, objective, and to serve taxpayers rather than try to brainwash them. So it's fascinating now, almost 1 year on, with the Trump administration gone, of course, and the pandemic still wreaking havoc around the world, it's fascinating to see how some of the left-leaning media suddenly are opening their eyes to reality, airing the evidence and daring to consider what might be the truth. The esteemed Washington Post, a political Bible for the liberal left in the US, the paper that broke and drove Watergate and has never had any truck with Trumpism, well, now it's aired its own view of the virus origins. It's published a long and detailed editorial, not a news piece, but a considered explanation of the publication's view. And it firmly targets the Wuhan Institute of Virology as being a key to finding the answers, a key that Beijing is hiding from the rest of the world. The Washington Post says there is one pathway that must be investigated, and that is the possibility of an accident or leak from the Institute. It could have involved a virus that was improperly disposed of, says the Washington Post, or perhaps an infected lab worker who passed it on. The editorial goes into a lot of compelling detail about who worked at the lab and what viruses they were working with. And it says this: to find out if there was a leak or laboratory accident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology or another lab, investigators would want to carefully examine research done there, including archived lab notes, records of experiments and data, intra-laboratory communications such as email, as well as bat samples, viral strains and all sequences from the Institute's collection to compare them with known genetic blueprints from the pandemic virus. This would require transparency and verification of data and sample provenance, but it has not been forthcoming. Yep, it's not been forthcoming, as the Washington Post recounts, and as we told you a number of times last year, all this links back to viruses that came from caves in faraway Yunnan province in 2015. They were sampled because 6 people removing bat faeces from those caves 3 years earlier had become infected with a disease, and 3 of them had died. So that virus was taken to Wuhan, and also, as we mentioned last year, there were reports from US intelligence and staff at the Institute fell ill in September 2019, and that activity at the laboratory stopped for a period following that month, in a manner consistent with a quarantine breach or an attempt to re-establish control at the lab. All this is just weeks before the first coronavirus cases were recorded in Wuhan. Also, around the same time, a crucial part of the laboratory's online database was closed off, supposedly for security purposes. We also know that doctors warning about the virus back then were threatened and silenced, which is why the Washington Post now highlights that a second portal of databases in China has gone offline, so that all the key virus databases managed by the Wuhan Institute are now offline. To be sure, the Washington Post does not say definitively that the Wuhan Institute is the source, nor do I, nor did Sharry Markson. But unlike Paul Barry and Beijing, I'm with the Washington Post. There is a lot of evidence pointing to this facility. The only way to prove this or disprove this is for the Chinese to allow full access to the lab, its staff and their databases. China is doing the opposite. It's hiding information. That works with some people like Paul Barry and the ABC, but the tide has turned. Have a look at this special report from CNN from late last year, after Trump lost the election, and suddenly they were revealing that China had lied, covered up and mishandled the virus outbreak before it became a global pandemic. It's extraordinary to see this turnaround, galling for Trump supporters perhaps, and anyone else who's become sick in recent months, I'm sure. but it underscores the truism that the truth does always come out. As Winston Churchill famously said, the truth is incontrovertible. Ignorance derides it, panic resents it, malice may destroy it, but there it is. Thankfully, some in the media, like Sharri Markson, still pursue it. Let's hope we do discover the full truth about the origins of this virus. Needless to say, this information is vital. It'll save lives. Let's bring in Sharri Markson now, who's now with The Australian and, of course, hosts Sharri here on Sky News on Sunday nights. Sharri, it must be just so relieving for you to see this vindication that those things you were probing 10 or 11 months ago are now being taken up by the Washington Post and CNN as others because there's so much truth in them.
Well, thank you very much, firstly, Chris, for your very kind words. But I don't think it's relieving for me personally from a vindication perspective, but just from this sense of we need to know, everyone around the world, as the Washington Post pointed out in their editorial, this virus has claimed, over 2 million, 2.5 million lives globally, my grandmother among them. We all around the world want to know how it started and why China covered up the early news of the virus, which already we know that to be factually the case, that they did not let the world know that there was this infectious virus. And they allowed people to travel globally. We need to know how it started, also from a scientific perspective, to prevent future pandemics. This is just a crucial question. And I think you're right that it has been a case of Trump derangement syndrome, why both, some leading scientists and certainly the media were so reluctant to investigate this, going on almost a year ago. And the only people who had an open mind were those who weren't so blinded by a hatred of Trump that instead they chose to actually look into this topic.
Well, the World Health Organization has been in China recently. They're trying to get to the heart of it. They're not getting all the information they need. There's not transparency and accountability from China. Apart from the relief, I suppose, that the truth is finally being examined in the Western media. The frustration is that most of this evidence was available. Most of these salient facts were verifiable back in May last year. So we've lost so much time on the investigations and allowed the Chinese so much more time to hide anything they want to.
Yeah, and not only that, while it is a relief that actually, that we finally do have WHO investigators in Wuhan, it's worth noting that at least one of those investigators, Peter Daszak from EcoHealth Alliance, he's been someone who has maintained from the very start of this pandemic that it could not have leaked from the lab, that it was definitely of natural origin. And he has had a long history of working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, of sharing funding with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So you have at least one investigator who goes into this supposedly independent WHO investigation in Wuhan with a closed mind, already having made up his mind on this topic, and not only made up his mind, but he was the one who put together a petition of scientists from around the world saying that it was definitely a natural origin, that it could not have come from the laboratory. And that was all exposed by the Right to Know Alliance in the United States, who actually managed to FOI that email correspondence. And you can read it. I did an editorial on it late last year on my show, but you can read that he was the one who led that campaign, and yet he's a critical member of the WHO investigation team. So I don't have an enormous lot of faith in this investigation team, even if they were able to get access to the database in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which, of course, we know Chinese authorities are not going to allow that.
It is the biggest story in the world. That's why I'm so keen to focus on it tonight. It's the most important story in the world as well, because so many people's health has been placed at risk. And everything the Chinese did early on, especially in Wuhan, obviously suggests that they knew exactly what they were dealing with right at the outset. You don't have much faith in the WHO, understandably and justifiably. What are you probing as a journalist? What do you think the best prospects are for investigations from the Western world, from media and from governments to actually get to the heart of this?
I think this is hopefully something that our intelligence agencies, 5 Five Eyes intelligence agencies are still looking at. You remember there was that rare statement from the US intelligence agency last year where they said on the record that an inadvertent laboratory leak was a line of inquiry that they were looking at. Clearly, there is more information there because we saw that US State Department statement that you just referred to in your editorial. That came out just December 17, at the very end of the Trump administration. There must be intelligence behind that, you would think. The fact that some of the laboratory workers fell sick in the autumn of 2019 with coronavirus-like symptoms. And also, what was so critical about that statement was the revelation that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing work for the Chinese military. And included in that was that China has a bioweapons program. No one has even gone there. This has been the realm it's been considered the realm of conspiracy theory stuff. And yet this was an on-the-record statement from the US State Department saying that China has a bioweapons program and that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing work for the Chinese military. So, at this point, we just have to trust that the intelligence agencies will eventually be able to access information or through a whistleblower. Personally, I am still investigating this and I hope to in the next 2 to 3 weeks have another piece of the puzzle out there. It's not solving the murder. I don't think I'll be able to do that personally, but it is a critical piece of the puzzle that hopefully we will be able to publish in the next few weeks.
Spot on. And those so far unconfirmed, I suppose, claims from US intelligence that were unverified would help to explain why the Chinese would be so sensitive and secretive about this institute. Thanks so much for joining us again, Shari. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your support as always.
Shari Markson there. You can read her in The Australian and see her here 7 o'clock Sunday nights.